Hello everyone, my name is Sam.Hamels. I'm a researcher at Ghent University in Belgium, and today I will tell you about a project I was involved in, which is called FlexSys, in about 15 minutes or so. But before doing so, I just want to quickly mention that all of the work in this project was funded by the Belgian federal government, and in particular the Energy Transition Fund, which is managed by the FPS economy. Now, let's start off by saying a few words about what the project was about. Now, the goal of the project is basically to help make progress towards a specific goal, and that is to make the electricity consumption of households more flexible, consuming a bit more at certain times of the day and less at other times of the day. And in particular, this kind of thing can be done in a big way with these two new assets that we all know and hear a lot about, which are electric vehicles and heat pumps, which each on their own consume quite a large amount of electricity on an annual basis compared to the other electricity consumption of a household. So they are interesting to look at and to try to make flexible. Now, here is what that could look like on paper for a heat pump. During certain hours of the day when electricity is cheap and there is a lot of wind and solar power, you could heat your home a bit more than usual in order to then turn it off and consume less electricity during hours when electricity is dirtier and more expensive. And that way, basically gaining a financial benefit while also concentrating your consumption more into the hours with greener and cheaper electricity. That gives you a rough idea of the general theme of this project, and let's now delve into some more specific things. In particular, we have done a real-world pilot where we tested a concept of heat pump flexibility, and I want to start off by telling you what this pilot was before delving into the results. Okay, so we had a group of 12 households who all heat their home with a heat pump. They were all from the Ghent area, and for 2 whole winters, we had control over their heat pump as researchers. And what we did with that is approximately twice per week, we did an intervention, by which I mean we turned off their heat pump and we let the house cool down until a certain indoor temperature is reached. For example, 19 degrees, but also other temperatures were used sometimes. And we observe what happens. How quickly does the house cool down? But also, does the household overrule us? Which is something they could do. They had an app and they could press a button saying, I want the heat pump to reactivate right now. Now, in order to do this, we had to crawl into people's basements and people's attics, install hardware to make measurements to be able to communicate with the heat pumps, and we basically got our hands dirty. So now let's go ahead and delve into the results of this real-world heat pump flexibility pilot. Now, a first big result of the pilot is that we basically saw buildings cooling down quite slowly after we turned off a heat pump. It took many hours, up to 10, even 20 hours, before the indoor temperature dropped by a few degrees. And this is, of course, the result of pretty good insulation in the case of our 12 households, but it is also very typical in general for households that have a heat pump to heat their homes to have above average levels of insulation. So in that sense, it's not very surprising, but it is good news for heat pump flexibility because being able to turn it off for at least several hours before any noticeable temperature impacts occur means that there is some room to play, let's say. So another result that I want to show you is what happened to electricity consumption. You can see here that when we did an intervention on a heat pump, of course, the electricity consumption dropped a lot when we sent our signal. We say we turn off the heat pump, but the electricity consumption doesn't go completely to zero because some critical standby systems inevitably remain active. And in the hours afterwards, one heat pump after another in our fleet of 12 households starts turning on again. and electricity goes up again. Eventually, it even becomes a bit higher than if we would have left the heat pumps alone, because of course the houses have cooled down and the heat pumps now have to work a bit harder in order to restore the indoor temperature back to the normal level. And this is a kind of a rebound effect, but it's basically an expected result because it's the shifting of energy use that's happening here, right? First using a bit less electricity, afterwards a bit more, and on a net basis, a bit less was consumed still, because basically there was a slight reduction in comfort. The house was only a bit cooler than usual for a few hours. And so that's what we saw here. And then a few more qualitative takeaways from what we learned in this pilot. First of all, some people like to be warned when their heat pump is going to be turned off. Others don't really care about it. Also, if you give people the option, like we did, to use an overrule button where they can end an intervention on their heat pump at any time, some people use it, others hardly use it at all. Human beings are very complex and heterogeneous in that sense, right? We see that here. And people give all kinds of reasons as well for why they use the overrule button. So people say my child is sick, or I'm working from home, or I have guests over for dinner. And all of these are potential reasons not to want any flexibility in your heating at a particular moment. And lastly, if you give people a nice platform, an app, a website where they can better understand what their heat pump is doing and why, they really appreciate that, or at least they did in this pilot of ours. Let's move on now to another thing we did in this FlexSys project, which is several large-scale surveys, each with about 1,000 respondents or more. And I want to quickly say a few words about what came out of those surveys. First of all, we see in the surveys that not everybody is willing to hand over control over their heat pump or electric vehicle. And those people that are willing often make it a strict condition to only allow that if they can overrule, and potentially also only allowing it if they are always notified when their heat pump or EV will be intervened on. Another thing we looked at is how willing people are to accept this heat pump flexibility, depending on how much it reduces their annual bill, the electricity they need to pay for to run their heat pump. If the bill on an annual basis is reduced by 10%, then we see that about 40% of people are okay with it as long as the indoor temperature fluctuations are no more than 1 degree around their preferred indoor temperature. And the amount of people that accept it goes down if the temperature fluctuations become 2 or 3 degrees, right? It becomes as low as 18% if these fluctuations would happen every day and be as large as 3 degrees. If, however, the bill would be decreased on an annual basis by 30% by doing heat pump flexibility, then, roughly speaking, 40 to 50% of people are okay with these indoor temperature fluctuations, and it doesn't even seem to matter that much anymore how frequently these fluctuations occur and if it's 1, 2, or 3 degrees around their preferred temperature. And finally, you also see that some people just don't want to accept anything like this, regardless of whether it would save them 10 or 30% on their annual bill. What also came out of our surveys is the observation that people have very diverse indoor temperature preferences, and more importantly, the range of temperatures that people feel comfortable in can vary a lot from person to person. Some people have a narrow range, only feeling comfortable within a very narrow bandwidth of temperature, and others are comfortable in a broad range of temperatures. Of course, heat pump flexibility is more well suited to this second category of people, and you can see that people are, as a general population, all at a certain spot on this spectrum. We also see that there can be large differences between what people say or state in a survey and then what they do in practice. Since we did both surveys and also this real-world pilot, we could clearly see that people may say that they are okay with their home being 17 degrees inside every once in a while, but then in practice they quickly overrule any intervention under heat pump as soon as the temperature would drop to 19 degrees, for example. It's important to take into account if you implement these kind of things in practice, of course. Now, quickly on a difference between heat pumps and EVs when it comes to flexibility and playing around with the electricity consumption. We see that if you play with heat pumps, and this leads to sometimes a decrease in the indoor temperature, the degree of discomfort and sort of how unhappy people feel about these comfort impacts, it steadily goes up in a linear way. And this is an important difference with respect to electric vehicles, where you see you can much more play around a bit with the electricity consumption, when is the car charging, etc., without really making people feel any discomfort at all. But if you go very far, then suddenly people become very discomforted because they can't drive to where they need to be anymore, and then they become very angry with you. So this is not the same linear evolution as we see in the case of heat pumps, and that's a worthy difference to be aware about. Moving on to the next part of the FlexSys project, which I will almost entirely skip over, is our building simulations. Now, all I really want to say about this for this video is that we had a building physics team here at Ghent University that simulated all kinds of different homes that exist in Belgium with different insulation levels, etc. Looking at, okay, if they are heated with a heat pump, then what does that look like from hour to hour for whole years that were simulated virtually? And that, of course, gave a lot of results in terms of tables like this, where you can see, okay, a certain heat pump in a certain building, when the temperature outside is a certain value, how much electricity consumption should you expect, etc. I don't have the intention here to go into detail, but just one more thing that I want to say here is that from these individual building simulations, we also aggregated to the national Belgian level to figure out what then the electricity consumption profile of the whole Belgian fleet of heat pumps would look like in the near and long-term future. This brings me to the last part of the FlexSys research project, where we looked at the question of, okay, if in the future you have many heat pumps that are smart and flexible, to which degree can this help out the national electricity system during difficult moments when the grid is experiencing stress? And there are good reasons to expect that heat pumps could play a role here, because they use 2,000–3,000 kilowatt hours per year, but most of that is used in a specific period in the winter, and specifically even most of it is used on the coldest days of winter, and that's exactly the typical moments when the national electricity system is also under peak stress or peak consumption. And so this overlap suggests that heat pumps may be able to do something here. But in order to study this, we needed to bring together two very separate worlds of modeling, which are, on the one hand, the world of modeling electricity systems, modeling energy systems on a large scale, and on the other hand, modeling individual buildings heated with heat pumps. These are typically not represented in a detailed way in the same model, so we tried to bring this together in a sort of link. And immediately we found that most of the time when the electricity system on a national level is in need of a little help, when the power plants are struggling to produce enough electricity to meet the full national demand for electricity, that these moments of stress usually only last a few hours. And this should be put next to the fact that heat pumps, as we saw in our pilot as well, can quite easily reduce their electricity consumption for a few hours or more. So this again provides further indication that there may be something to do here, and this motivated us to look deeper. However, before showing the final results of this analysis, quickly on the assumptions, we assumed that in the future all heat pumps in Belgium would react to a signal to reduce their consumption, and that all the owners of these heat pumps would allow their homes to cool down by 2 degrees. And we ignore the risk that when the heat pumps need to reheat the homes back to normal temperature, that this itself would cause a new grid stress event. So these are all simplifying but important assumptions to take into account when I now show you the final results. So here are these results. So under the stated assumptions, we found that for the moments of grid stress, when it's difficult to meet the full demand for electricity, if these scarcity events take 1, 2, 3 hours, you can almost perfectly deal with those with heat pumps in our sort of linked modeling and in these kind of simulations we did. However, if you have grid scarcity events that last for many more hours, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, then heat pumps can only to a much smaller degree really help out and make sure that the lights stay on at the national level. And our final conclusions from this are that yes, heat pumps can be turned off for a few hours without a really insignificant impact on comfort, generally speaking. And heat pumps could play a significant role in dealing with short scarcity events at the national level, helping out the grid in those situations. But that we should also clearly realize that heat pumps are not a panacea. They are not the full solution to keeping the lights on in a country. That wraps it up. So here is my email address if you have any questions or comments for me. And finally, this QR code you can scan and it will take you to the document we made oriented towards policymakers and the general public about this research we did in the FlexSys project.